So welcome to you all. My name is David Pickering. I'm a Senior Technical Marketing Engineer here at Ivanti, and I'm going to be running through the presentation and demonstration today that you're going to look at on Ivanti Neurons for HR. And why are we looking at HR or HR service management? Gartner says that HR service management will be used by 70% of organisations by 2024 that have more than 2,500 employees. And in talking to Forrester last week, they say that 83% of organisations who use an IT service management platform have some sort of line of business technology that they're running on that IT service management platform. And the majority of those are typically HR or facilities. But in this session, we're going to talk about HR service management. And in future sessions, you'll see that we're going to talk about facilities management. But let's have a look at that. But before we get started, I wanted to ask a question of how do you interact with your HR department? So the question we're going to have is, how do you interact with your HR department today? So it's a short poll. I just wanted to understand this. Is it through email, phone, chat? Maybe you've got a SharePoint site that you work on. Maybe there's an intranet web portal that you might be able to use. Or are you unfortunately using paper-based forms, or is there some other technique that you use? The reason we ask that is most organisations will typically be doing reasonably manual processes, and it's normally through email, and they'll be working through their emails. And how do they track that email process, or how do they track all those conversations? Sometimes they get lost in email, but then more importantly, how do you actually then manage or track the KPIs or measurement against that? So I'd be very interested to understand from your point of view, how are you going from the point of view of interacting with your department, your HR department? So let's have a look at those results. And I'm not necessarily surprised by this. 61% at this point are saying they interact via email. And that is a fairly normal process in most organisations. Most organisations will take, let's email the HR department and ask them a question or get something done that way. You know, a lot have introduced some sort of web portal, which is a useful process, but but how do you manage that workflow behind the scenes? Or you might be trying to use the HR tools, the capabilities. Some of them are introducing portals, but normally they're very precise on what they want to do from a portal side of it. So it's very good information, and that's sort of what I was expecting to see with, email or phone for and intranet to sort of see that. Now let's have a look. Now let's get into what we want to talk about. And in this day and age, the digital HR experience is vital. We're working from everywhere. We're working from home, remote locations. It might be a hybrid location as well. But how does HR interact? And we've already seen we're doing it through email. But how do we manage that in a more sustainable way? We want to get efficiencies within the HR department. How do we bring those efficiencies into the HR department? Do we do it through automated workflows? Can we do it through a method of being able to manage these queues easily rather than doing it through email? How do we make that digital HR experience more important and more successful for your HR department? And one of the things we need to admit is, HR teams are at the heart of the employee experience. If I send an email off to my HR team and I don't get a response for a week, that typically is not a good experience from my point of view. So what are we looking at from a HR side? Well, we know HR handle recruiting and onboarding and benefits and employee requests. There might be cases that need to be resolved, issues, travel requests, offboarding. They have policies that they want to have and updated on a regular basis, managing company culture and even training and payroll. So HR touches a lot of things across that employee experience and a lot of areas that are important for organisations and employees to touch on. And we won't necessarily touch all of these. We may not need to worry about employee requests because I've never had an issue or a case management. But it might be I want to understand my policies or what do I get benefits-wise. There's always something that we're talking about from a HR side that all of us will have some interaction with HR. And it needs to be clear that what we're talking about is not your HR solution. So you'll have a Workday or an SAP or an Oracle HR solution. And they could be human capital management or HR information services that are going to be handling that talent management, that workforce management, or the core HR capabilities like payroll or benefits. They're the core HR systems. And as I said, some of those are starting to introduce portals into their environment. But what we're talking about is HR service management, which is complementary to your HR applications. And this is where you start to introduce some things like omni-channel self-service, a personalized access to policies and procedures, for example. So whilst they might be on the internet, how do you find them? If I've got a query or an issue, how do I raise a case or a request? Having a knowledge base of common questions that would be asked by your employees, and life event workflows and business processes. Things change. We need to update addresses. Our compensation's not right. Our payroll changes. How do we manage all of those? Onboarding, offboarding, and other related HRSM questions. But these need to still be integrated to the back end. If we have a compensation question, that will end up at the payroll, for example. So we need to make sure there's integration between the two services, but they're complementary. We're not replacing a HR solution. We're enhancing that HR solution in the HR organization. And within the solution, what we're looking at is unifying the employee experience across the business. So using service management to be able to manage different processes. So if it's the onboarding, how do we manage that onboarding? Because traditionally or typically, onboarding touches multiple places. So HR will handle the onboarding, but IT need to have some approach to that. They need to order the desktop, the laptop, the desktop, the phone, give them access to the appropriate systems. Facilities might be required to give them a cubicle in an office environment. So what are all the different parts of that organization that need to be touched for onboarding, and how do you make that seamless? If you're having leave or payroll issues or even offboarding touches similar things, we want to make sure that it's simplified and easy for everyone to go through that process. So what does Ivanti Neurons for HR provide you from the point of view? So employee administration. So we want to automate that onboarding and offboarding and transition that easy process between different departments to make it simple from a workflow side of things. We want to handle HR case management. So if there is a query from a user, how do we manage that? And potentially, how do we even remove the need to have them asking that question anyway through potentially a HR knowledge base? So if they've got a question around, let's say, a dress code policy, how do we easily get that answered without them raising that question to HR? And what we call is, case deflection. And providing an employee self-service that is through multiple different channels, so appropriate. You don't have to not do email anymore. But you can also have a self-service portal or a chat or potentially even a virtual agent. We want to simplify the process for the employee and improve the process at the back end for the HR department so they can work more on different processes or different just tasks. So what we're going to do is go and look at our demonstration. We're going to jump into here and start to say, how are we handling that employee experience with HR and how are we improving that? So let's go and look at that demonstration now. What we're going to walk through here is looking at this. So within the Ivanti ITSM solution, we have the ability to add in HR services and facility services. And you can have an enterprise landing page, which is what we've got here. We've got an enterprise landing page that's going to direct me to IT, HR, or facilities. We're going to leap straight into the HR services, and that gives you a unique experience just for the HR side. Now, you could have people log directly into the HR services portal. You don't need to go to an enterprise landing page, but we want to make that a capability that you can offer if you want to. Now that I'm here, maybe I'm looking for some question about benefits. So I'm just going to type into my query here and just type in benefits. That's the simple query that I'm going to type in at this time. Now, what's going to return is all the things that HR offer from our benefits side. What are the package enrollments? So I can go and request package enrollment. Maybe I've got a claim. But it could also be an announcement. So it's telling me the benefit system is down, or it could be a knowledge base article. So I'm going to have a look at that knowledge base article. We're going to start to look at a bit more information. So what does it tell me? How do I access the benefits portal? Because it might be an external link. What are information? Are there attachments? I can rate that article, put in whether it was helpful for me, and I can leave that feedback so the HR department, when they look at this knowledge article later, can get a feeling for, did the person like that knowledge article? Was it useful to them? What was the benefit to that particular person? So we can go through that process of just asking a question. Now we have announcements, as I mentioned. These announcements can pop up, and the announcements will be based on your regional location. So in this particular case, we're saying that announcement is a global announcement. So it's going to go to the entire organization. But if we're running a global organization, a lot of the times announcements and knowledge articles need to be processed according to that region or that location. And we'll look at how we manage that a bit later. But in this case, we're saying it's a global announcement. But if we were to say we want to come into here and I work in the APAC region, then I'm going to see this particular announcement, but EMEA or the US would not see that announcement. So we can start to be a bit more precise on what information do we present. We're not going to send out something that's for the US to everyone in the world because it's not relevant to them from their point of view. Now, I may also have from the self-service portal, maybe I've got a question or potentially an issue that I want to raise with HR. And I don't know what the answer is. Maybe I can't find it anywhere else. I just want to understand what the dress code is in the organization. Now, I could send an email to my HR department. I could create this as a HR case. But what we want to do is give your employees the ability to be able to answer or find this solution in their own right. So as we've typed in that summary, we've come back with a knowledge article that's relevant to that question that they're asking. And now they can read through this knowledge article and look at, okay, what is the answer to this? And what are the procedures? And what am I expected? So I know now how I'm meant to dress for a work environment. It's business casual. What does that mean? So I have that ability now to deflect that. So the user has gone, well, I'm going to create a HR case to have HR answer it. I've already got my answer from the knowledge base. I actually now don't need to go and get that answered from the HR department. So simplifying the simple questions, removing those simple questions to enable them to be answered easily by your knowledge articles that you have available. We also offer a HR service catalog. So these are all the things that an employee might want to order, for example. So they might want to come in here and say, look, I've got a compensation issue. I want to request some information around that compensation issue. So they can raise that within there. We can come in here and say, yes, we have a compensation issue. And maybe I'm expecting a bonus. We can submit that, and that will go into the HR department for them to look at of what do I want to do? How do I want to manage that? Now, we might also, while we're in here, we've got plenty of different queries that we've got there. We can search across there and look at maybe I need to onboard a new employee as a manager. So we're going to do a new employee onboarding, and we're going to look at that as to what does that look like? And these are all configurable, so the information you request is something that you can change accordingly. Bring that into different departments. We can fill in the information that we want to look at. Just quickly go through. We're looking at an accounting department. Let's start. Location. So this starts to link into facilities management. What's the location we want to bring that person on board to? So I can say, there, do they have an office or a cubicle? So the facilities team can manage that. We've got IT information. What do we not have there? What sort of desktop or notebook do they require? Do they need a mobile phone? What mobile phone do they require? What applications might they require? We could do that by role, for example. In this case, we'll do put in the various applications that they need access to, and then we can submit that if there's anything else. Maybe we want a business card as well. So that's just the onboarding. Now, in a lot of cases, that might come from your human capital management system or your recruiting system. So we might get that as an integration, but we could submit that in from your self-service portal. Now, as I said, most cases it typically would come from an integration with, say, your Workday or your SAP. We're going to submit that, and that will go into the system as a request, and we'll look at the workflow behind that request. But as you can see, it's more than just, I want this new employee. It's, I want this new employee. What do I want from an IT? What do I want from the facilities? What applications? Do I need business cards? Do I need credit card? So there's a lot of different applications that might play into that with what we need to do. Now, we talked about having that omni-channel experience for the employees to be able to ask different questions, get it in different ways. And we've looked at this from a self-service. We looked at it from reporting an issue, requesting HR. We can track any of the requests that we've just put into the system. So I can hop into here and say, okay, where am I within that? So I've just submitted that request. But maybe I want to chat to HR. So I can actually go and say, I want to start a chat session with HR. Paternity leave, do I get? And the HR department can initiate a chat session with the HR analyst. And we can start that session and start talking. And they could have looked through that from the self-service, so they could have done a search that way, but they may also want to do that from having a chat session. So that chat session will automatically link to an individual within your organization. Now, we also have the capability to extend that even further. So we've looked at it from a chat, we've looked at the self-service portal. But what about if we were to do that from a virtual agent? So now we can start to look at this from a virtual agent. This is called the Neurons Digital Assistant. And this can run within Microsoft Teams. It can run as an independent web service, and we can manage that in different ways. So if I was to come into here and say, maternity leave, do I get? We'll ask the same question. It will go off and query your knowledge base and the information it has available to you. And it will come back with an answer. And it comes back with, we allow you 6 months paid leave, but it gives you a little bit more. So it gives you paternity leave, allowing you that. And then you can flag that. Was it helpful? No, I want to get someone to help. And if we say I want to get someone to help, it will log a HR case so it doesn't get lost in the system. And we can do that. We could have the same question around. We can ask different questions using natural language processing. We can start to use the Neurons Digital Assistant against your HR environment, and it will give you information that's relevant to you as an individual. So that's driving that from a smart Neurons Digital Assistant or a virtual agent capability. Now, let's have a look. So we've looked at everything from an employee side of things. So let's look at this from a HR side of things and look at how we interact and work at that level. So now we're looking at this from our HR analyst, or in this particular case, I'm in as a HR manager. Now we have dashboards that are aligned to your HR manager. You can have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 type capabilities. So I can have an analyst view of any of these dashboards. So as a HR analyst, I'm going to have my own dashboard, which looks at, here's the information I want to look at. What am I working on? If I have any open tasks, any cases I'm following up on, anything that's assigned to me. As a HR manager, I'm looking at it slightly different because I want to look at what active cases are assigned to my team, to individuals, how many cases do they have? So I can start to look at, do I need to potentially take some workload off someone or put some more workload in there? What teams do they have? Where are we from a status? What active VIP cases do we have? Because that's important. And then how do we manage that from what sort of requests are we getting? Are they payroll questions? What questions are they? We can drill into this data and look at all the payroll questions and understand the information. So it's about giving you the detail that we want to have that you can start to measure. How are we working? How are we going from that point? Now let's look at the requests that we put in there. So we've got a couple of cases that we would have put in. I'm going to look at two different ones. I'm going to look at a couple of different ones here and look at different information. I'm just going to come back into that. So I've got my compensation issue, which I raised this before. I've also got one that I created earlier, which is a whistleblower. So something that we might want to treat a little bit differently to how we would actively do it. So when I come into that query, I'll have who requested it, what the information is. It gets assigned to the team, and we can look at what the status is. And we have different statuses there, what the priority is, and what our categorizations are. We can add in follow-up dates. So if I need to follow up on particular information, I can do that. So I need to get back to someone by the 29th. I can save that detail. Now, where it starts to get to be confidential information, so in this case where it's a whistleblower or a potential leak of information, we want to actually just limit who can actually look at this information. So what I can do here and start to limit the ability of other people to look at that. So I'll say, who's allowed to look at this now? And I can go and just put in a list of different people who maybe we want to have look at that. So I can say, well, I want to have a look. And I can link other people in here as well. Link in a few other extra people that we want to have there. So we want to restrict who can look at information that they shouldn't be allowed to look at and who do we want to look at. Now, we also have the concept of checklists, and checklists are a good way of saying, for this particular type of scenario, what are the things that we might want to look at? So we're not tasks you typically assign to someone. A checklist is something that's going to be my way of tracking what I need to do. So I've got a whistleblower checklist. I'm going to add that in there. And now I've got this checklist that I can work against. I can say, okay, have I notified legal? So I can say, yes, I have. Have I notified the manager? Yes, I've done that. I've set the HR case to confidential, and we haven't done the PR case. So I can track some of that information. It just gives me a means of going, what do I need to do in this circumstance? And how do I manage that? And let's look at the compensation issue. Now, we talked about this workflow concept of how do we manage workflows through the process and what do we need to do? So when we got a compensation issue, the first thing we might need to do is actually go and get the manager approval to say, look, if we want to make this change, we need to get a manager to approve this request. I can see I'm the manager of this individual. So I can go to the approvals. I could do this through my mobile phone. I can do any of those other requests that I might want to do. In this case, this is my case that I'm looking at. And I can just approve that. And what we should then see is we've now gone back to go back to my cases. And we should see that has been approved, which it is. And you'll see now that it's actually gone to the HR manager. So there's a workflow behind this that is driving this view of information. And what we're looking at here is we've defined this workflow to say, first thing we need to do is get approval by the manager. Then we might need to go to the HR manager, finance, payroll. And you can adjust these workflows to suit your organization. It's a very simple process. And we can go through that particular step just to say, right, now the HR manager. And before anything happens, we update the payroll, we need to have all these approvals in place. And we can automate that process. So as you've seen, we automatically added the manager, they approved it, now goes to the HR manager. So we're automating how we go about working, what are we working on, etc. And let's look at that from a slightly different side, the HR requests. And we want to look at that from my employee onboarding. So we should have my, go back to here, I should have that in there. Got a new employee setup. And this is the one that we might have put in here before. That's not the one. You'll see again, we've got approval process that has to go through. So we have to go through the approvals. I can look at the approvals and go back to my list of requests. I can approve it. And what will happen as we go through this process is we will now get that request updated. And this is a workflow behind it that is going to drive what we want to do. So I can look at that instance of that workflow. Once we get the manager approval, we create an employee account, and then we look at what else was requested. Was it hardware? Was it business cards, facilities requests, etc.? Let's look at how that looks with one other record there that had that before. We can see all the different tasks that get assigned. So we now drive my process. So we have the application access, and what are the applications we wanted? We want Salesforce and SAP. That's going to IT security, for example. Workspace setup goes to facilities. And again, we can have information about where we want that. We said US, Colorado Springs, we want a cubicle. Credit card, business cards, and hardware. So we're driving the different tasks that need to be assigned to different teams to get this processed and get this happening. So that's the ability to walk through that HR approvals, the HR automating the workflows, automating the process. And we did that fairly quickly from the point of view of how we ran that. Let's have a look at the last two things, which is HR announcements and knowledge articles. So announcements are, trying to publish out something that's happening over the period of time. And we can go through and look at that as to what we want to do. So we can define a new article. We can put in the description of the announcement that we want to have there. And this is where we define who that region is. So if I go create a new one, this is where I can define what the region is that I want this to go against. Is it Americas, APAC, EMEA, or is it a global question that we want to drive out there? So then we're starting to say this particular knowledge, this particular announcement is only going to go to those regions. We don't need to go to other regions. Other regions don't need to do that. And that's based on the employee record that logs in as to what region they'll work out on. Now, if we look at knowledge articles, we have a similar concept. We're saying, what is the dress code policy? So I've defined our knowledge article. We put in the keywords that we have in there. We can edit that. And then we have the countries that we want that relevant to. So if I want to add a new country, so I want to add in Canada into that, I can go and say, I want Canada to be able to look at that. So again, trying to give you the most relevant information for what you're looking at, not giving you too much information. So we don't want to go global and give you everything. We want to do that and drive that through particular organizations that we have. So coming up near to the end of our time, I'm going to come back in here and just look at some of your questions and try and answer those as we go through it. So the first question was, is it recorded? We've had that answered. So we have a question, how do you keep the employee team different from the service desk, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 teams? We define each of the caseworkers within their own group. So you can say, okay, this is a tier 1 group and they'll be assigned that. So we'll have seen maybe within that what the owning team is. So you could have a HR benefits 1, HR benefits 2. We have organizations that might do it from, here's our HR APAC team, here's our HR US team, here's our HR EMEA team, and it could be split out to benefits, etc. So you can, it's based on the group that you have defined in there and how they want to do that. How many chat channels are available? So if the IT desk is already using chat, how can we add the HR teams? That would be something we'd do at the professional services. When we implement this, we'd get them to sort of manage how we do the chat within that. From a virtual agent side, it's fairly straightforward on what we do there. What does the people see that do not have permissions to see the confidential case but happen to have the case number? They won't be able to access that case. So even though they've got the case number and they do a search for it, what's going to happen is that case number is going to come back. It's going to say it's not found. So you don't have that permission. We're using a role-based access to say how we're going to look at that and restrict that. Is that checklist tab available for other objects like IT service requests? So it can be configured for that. So you can can configure to be able to use the checklists. It's not out of the box from that point of view, but we can have that professional services and configure that within the tool. And just to wrap up, what we're talking about here is not, we don't necessarily, shown you a lot. You don't have to start with everything. You can start from a simple case management, knowledge, and even chat, but you can still continue to use email. So where you saw before when we looked at the case that was created, we could capture that through our email integration and actually create the case from an email. So even though they're sending the email to your HR support team, for example, we could have Ivanti Neurons for HR look at that inbox and create the case. So you can use the back-end system, which is Ivanti Neurons for HR, but they could still be interacting through email. And we're just automating that process. And then you could expand out to the HR portal, the service catalog, and start to introduce more advanced techniques like virtual agents, more access around knowledge management, etc. So really, it's a journey that you can take to get to where you want to get to from a HR side. There's flexibility to start small and expand out from there. What I hope you've seen a little bit of, and I know it was a very short half-hour demo, but we can, it's about improving the employee experience and the productivity and efficiency of your HR staff. If you're using a queue system and managing it through KPIs and dashboards and metrics, you can start to get a better feel for what are you getting, what do you need to work on, maybe pushing more information out to knowledge management so you can start to deflect that information, automate workflows so that we saw that with the onboarding, and you can start to adapt that and increase and improve upon those workflows and what you work with from a day-to-day side of things. And thank you very much for joining this session today.
Yeah.